Back from holiday, and especially those young people who are back from their camps. Amen. I heard that you had a glorious time, a powerful time, and it hardly rained out there. And Steve is going to give us some testimonies about what happened out there in a few weeks' time. It's great that young people go to a place. They have no choice but to go to seminars. They have no choice but to eat the food that's out there. It's a little bit regimental, but God does amazing things to the young people when they're out there. I thank the Lord that I went to camps when I was younger. I didn't like going to camps, by the way. I didn't like camping. They put up the tents, not like today. You take your tents with you, don't you? And you put them up. We had tents already put up for us, which was absolutely marvelous. But I became a Christian through a camp. And I thank the Lord for that. Lots of young people become Christians through camps. And so it's good to send them away, and they don't get distracted by friends and family and all that kind of stuff, and they can concentrate on the Lord and the Lord only. And I thank the Lord that when I was 10, He brought me to Himself, and I gave my heart to Him, and I've never been the same since. And through that, I preached to my parents, I preached to my family, and I still preach to them to this very day. I have a cousin who I knew her when I was very, very young, and she used to come back every week with a new boyfriend. And because I was naive, very naive in those days, about my Christianity, I often said to her, she brought back a new boyfriend or some other man or whoever it was, I used to say, "You're going to go to hell." You know, I didn't let go. I just said, "You're going to be condemned, and God's going to do this and this." And I didn't hold back, as a young person. And we're still very, very good friends to this very day. And she was here, obviously, for my mum's funeral. And she always says to me, "I'm going to think about going to church. I'm going to think about going to a church near where I live." And I recommended my friend's church where she lives right now. So you never know what God may be doing. Even though the seeds you plant when you're younger will affect later on. They become trees. Hallelujah. So never ever think that you're sowing into, if you are an obedient person, you're sowing into fertile ground. Something will grow eventually. There are seeds that are growing now that I planted almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago. They started to show shoots now. Now last week we spoke about Egypt. I'm speaking about Egypt from freshness of going there myself. We spoke about the time of Moses who delivered his people. Now, everybody knows the story very well. They know it because they know it through the Charlton Heston films. You remember Charlton Heston? Some of you are too young to remember Charlton Heston. And I forgot who Pharaoh represented, but he was another famous actor as well. And the Charlton Heston films, they're great, amazing films done in, I think, the 30s or the 40s. But this is real. What we're talking about is real. And last week I talked about the plagues, the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt. And every plague was aiming at a god. If you have gods in your life, if you look, you can look at this yourself and go back and review it. But every plague hit a god. In other words, there was a plague of the River Nile. And that was a god of the Nile, and there was a plague of the flies, and there was a plague of the locusts, and there were a plague, and the last plague of all that God hit was the plague to do with every firstborn was to die, and unless Pharaoh released his people. And the Bible says that Moses said, "Let my people go." And we are in a season today that there are people that are engaged and frustrated and imprisoned, and they need to be let gone. In other words, they need to be free. There are so many people that are imprisoned with things, and they just need freedom. They need liberty. Now, that doesn't mean you do everything you want and you do it when you want. It means that you live in a freedom that God has given you, but at the same time you have responsibility and you have accountability. And there's nothing like living under accountability and responsibility, knowing that you're safe, knowing that this is a home that you can come to every day of the week. But I love the story. I love the story. And in that part of the Passover, it's called the Passover because the angel of death passed over, because the people who were going to be safe were the people who God instructed to put blood around the lintels, a representation of Jesus Christ, put blood around the lintels, and so that the angel of death will pass over. If you want God to do something in your life, you have to pray that the angel of death will always pass over your life. In other words, the angel of death could knock on your door several times of the week and several times of the month and several times of the year. You just got to ask him, look, I'm going to put lintels, I'm going to put blood, not literal blood, by the way, but blood of prayer in place. I'm going to put my protective provisions, I'm going to put the Bible in place, I'm going to learn the Bible, and I'm going to put that in place. All those are protective provisions around the lintels that will protect you from the angel of death. If you don't do that, you are vulnerable and volatile to the enemy. And I'm going to show you some things today. But, you know, as I was reading this, I thought to myself, shall I take them through the journey of the desert now? No, I felt I just needed you to hear something about the man Moses. And something came to me. Now, I said we're going to be in the Old Testament, didn't I, last week? Do you remember that? But there's snapshots in the New Testament that we can read that will just show us the man himself, Moses himself. And I thought it'd be good to look at Moses, the man of faith. And I'd like you to turn to Hebrews 11. If you've got Hebrews 11, it will be on the screen. And I'd like you to turn to verses 23. And we're going to read from 23 onwards. And this whole chapter of Hebrews 11, as you know, is all about the book of faith. People who had faith. Now, we're going to explain a little bit about that in a moment. But where I'm coming from this morning is the faith that makes a decision that you will accept, and a faith that makes a decision that you will reject. I'll say that again. A faith that makes a decision that you will accept things. And lots of people say about faith, they talk about faith like, I accepted this and I went into this and I had faith for this and everything. But they never ever talk about what they gave up and what they rejected. You see, there's a twofold characteristic in faith itself. And we're going to look at this. What Moses, accepted. More than that, today I feel like we've got to look at what Moses rejected. Because once we look at what we give up, we'll see that our rewards will be. We always go on about what we've done and how we've done it and how good God has been, but I want to know what did you give up for it? Well, not much. See, a lot of people go into pastoral work and to these things. They don't give up anything. They're really going into promotion. But when you hear a pastor who is giving up things for the life of the people, you can know that person will one day be rewarded in a big way. So we're going to look at that through the book of Moses. Let's read this by faith. Everybody say by faith. Moses, when he was born, was hidden in 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the sons of Pharaoh's daughter. Wow. Choosing rather to endure its ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. For he was looking to the reward. That's almost like a contradiction. He had everything possibly that he could have, and yet he was looking for another reward. Not the reward that he had or where he was, but the reward of where he was going to and what God was going to provide him. Stick with me with this, folks. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. For he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Then it says, by faith he kept Passover and sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. There you have it, folks. That's the story of Moses. Now I can go home. But I'm not going to. I want to break this up for you this morning. I'm going to try to be as slow as possible so that you grab some of these things. And I really want to hone probably into what Moses actually, in these few verses, rejected rather than what he accepted. One of the questions the Jews would ask during this time. Now, you've got to remember the book of the Old Testament is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That they call the Pentateuch. That means they're 5 books of Moses. But really, Moses' stance or Moses' stories in the book of Exodus all the way to the book of Deuteronomy, actually Deuteronomy 34. So if you look at it very carefully, there's a big chunk in the Old Testament of Moses himself. But in the New Testament, when the Hebrews started to read this, there was something different about the Moses they read in the Old Testament to the Moses they started to read in the New Testament. You see, let me explain a little bit about this. In the Old Testament, you see, they would have seen a Moses who was ceremonial. In other words, Moses put a lot of laws into place. I mean, you just have to read the book of Leviticus. I mean, you just would not understand half of the stuff in there. But it was very ritual orientated. But religion is not a ritual, is it? We don't believe in rituals. It doesn't mean that through works that we do, out of works that we do, that we'll go to heaven. That's not what it's about. Faith is about what you believe and how it comes within you, and then out of that comes the works that Christ wants for you. So ceremonies, rituals, he kept laws, external laws. He did what the rabbis often did every week. They had 613 laws. I mean, that's how they understood Moses. There was circumcision. There was contribution in terms of finance and all sorts of things. But now they read a different type of Moses in the book of Hebrews. So if you were a new convert, you would read this and you would say to yourself, what type of Moses is this? This is a Moses of faith. What is a Moses of faith? We've never heard this before. We've heard Moses, who in terms is the lawman, the guy who puts all the rules and everything into place. Now it's about faith, and now it's about grace. We have already learnt that in this book of faith, that we learned that Abel, how he demonstrated faith, and it was by his faith that he was reconciled to God. We learnt about Enoch, another person. We learned about Noah, and we learnt about Abraham. And then we learnt about the patriarchs, which are Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We learn all about these guys, and then we learn about this guy, Moses, who you would never ever think was a man of faith. And yet the new writer says this is what he did through faith. Faith is defined by their relationship. You see, you don't define a Christian by what they do, you define a Christian by their faith. What they've actually done in their lives through faith. You see, the definition is very simple. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things we cannot see. So there's always going to be something that we will take a risk in, or we will jump into things that we cannot see, but we do it not because we just believe it, but we believe that God will be there with us. And we believe that it is God that is extending his arm towards us. So the extensive that goes through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is all about Moses making decisions. Now, I know there are people in this room today that have to make decisions. I want to help you make your decision. What is your decision that you are going to be making? And is it going to be the right decision? How do you know that you've made the right decisions? Well, this passage helps us this morning. And we will see things. So let's change the title a little bit. I'm sorry about this. I'm going to change the title. And the title's going to be this: Things Faith Accept and Things That Faith Reject. There are things that you will accept, and there are things that you have to reject. The choice of faith, that's the choice. It extends, say, beyond Moses, is because this is a good way to look in a general at the life of faith, because it's genuine saving faith. The faith that I do, the way I step out of things, the way I step into the unknown is what God looks at. He doesn't look at the things that I do every single day of my life that he knows it's a routine, because we are creatures of habit. We do the same things and we say it's faith. We meet the same people and we say it's faith. We have a prayer meeting, we say it's faith. But it's absolutely nothing to do with faith, because all you're doing is doing the same routine over and over again. But how do we get out of that? Now we know a Moses that is not full of religiosity or ceremony, but a man that is full of faith. Well, let's walk by this. You know, when I studied Abel a few years ago, I knew that he was a man who lived by faith. When I studied Enoch, I knew that he was a man that walked by faith. And when I studied Noah, I knew he was a man that worked by faith. And when I studied Abraham, I knew that he was a man of patterns of faith. And so when I look at this, I see a man that acts in the terms of decisions that he has to make by faith. Is there anyone in this room that has to make some decisions? 2 people. Oh, wow, I'll have to go and preach somewhere else. No one has to make any decisions in this room. Poor people. That means you're just heading towards a road that is going to be a dead end at the end of the day. You have to make some decisions in life. If there aren't any decisions you're making, then there's something not quite right. And those decisions have to be either good decisions or good choices, should I say, or bad choices. You often hear people these days who make rather modest decisions, or they say something like, you know, I made a bad choice. And I counsel a lot of people who say to me, I made a bad choice. Now, it seems like it's a metaphor for mistakes. I made a bad choice. And they were passionate about the bad choice they made at the time. It could have been full of lust or full of stealing or thieving or drinking or whatever it is. They made a bad choice. And they say, I made a bad choice and I made some bad choices. And they fell on the ground because of it. They hurt themselves because of it. Because bad choices, you always end up hurting yourself more than you hurting other people. Other people get affected, but you get hurt the most. And every day and every circumstances poses another opportunity for us to make a choice. I have to make big choices, huge choices. Every single week I'm making a choice about something or someone because I have to move the ship forward. I have the steering wheel in my hand, and sometimes I find it so hard. I was sunbathing in the Red Sea, by the way. I don't want to make you jealous here, but I went asking God to open it up because I enjoyed the water. So I was there sunbathing in the Red Sea, and I said, there was one thing I had to make a choice, and I said, Lord, what are you going to do? I didn't say what I'm going to do. I said, what are you going to do? I need your help. And I really cried out. In the sea. I said, what are you going to do? Just imagining what Moses did by lifting up his staff and the sea being split. I said, what are you going to do? Napoleon used this. He said, in every battle, there is a 10 or 15 minutes period of time in which the issues of the battle is settled. To gain this is victory or to lose. Imagine that. Napoleon was saying that when he's in the battle, he's got 15 to 10 minutes to make a decision whether they're going to have victory or no victory. Because choices either give you victory or they don't give you victory at all. You can make the worst choices, the worst financial choices, the worst choices of choosing the wrong partner. And many Christians have done that. They've chosen the wrong partner, and after a few years, it falls flat on their face. Even though I've told them 25 times, they just don't want to listen because they have a Pharaoh spirit in them. It's a stubborn spirit. Let my people go. No, they won't just listen. It doesn't matter how many plagues you send upon them. They just will not move. Because their opportunity is very temporary. It's temporary at the moment of time. But they don't think about the external consequences that God will be using them. They don't think about the grasp of the opportunity to glorify God at the time. At the time, they're not glorifying God at all. They're just making their own decisions. You choose the way of God, the way of the truth, and the way of righteousness, then you'll see things that will move forward. You'll always go through the valley of death, and it will always hurt sometimes, but you will see things that will happen. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 19, the scripture says this, I call heaven earth. This is what Moses says, to record this day against you that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Those are the two choices. You either choose blessing or you choose curses. Now, I don't know what choice you want to make in life, but that's what you choose. A curse, let me tell you what a curse is. It's not a witchy poo thing. It's not a Harry Potter thing, right, that some of us may think. A curse is inversely proportional to a blessing. So God will continuously bless you As you are obedient to God, if you are continually obedient to God, He will continually bless you. There's no doubt in my mind about that. He'll bless you with great children. He'll bless you with a great partner. He'll bless you with your finances. There's no doubt. He won't make you materialistic, and I pray you'll never become materialistic. But there is nothing wrong with God prospering you in the things that you do. Prosperity means several things. It doesn't mean just finance. It means health. It means friendship. It means contacts. It means connections. It means divine interventions with other people. So you choose that. You choose life or you choose death. There's no other choice in between. And sometimes I wish there was, but there isn't. Joshua said this, and if it seems, in Joshua 24:15, he says, and if it seems evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. And Joshua was saying, this is the day. If you want to serve the Lord, say it now. This is your opportunity. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So he said, I don't care. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You choose. This is your choice. You've made your choices. He says, you carry on and do what you want to do. But as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord.
Amen.
Well, one amen. 1 Kings 18:21, Elijah said, how long do you halt between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If he's Baal, then follow him. And the people answered not a word. Because people are embarrassed themselves. You have a choice. Abel chose God's way, the more excellent sacrifice than his brother Cain. Did you remember that? He says, this is an excellent sacrifice. I'm making an excellent sacrifice. And Cain came along and just killed him off. Enoch chose God's way to walk with God. Noah chose God's way. The rest of the human race drowned in his generation. Can you imagine the whole of generation God took out and said, Noah, your eight members of family, they'll succeed because you came and you worshipped me. It's amazing what God can do. We want to make the right choices, don't we? When the Lord gave me this word, I was thinking about Moses. And like I said, I was thinking about the things that he rejected more than the things that he accepted. Because accepting a bar of gold is easy. Isn't it? Okay, I'm not going to give you a bar of gold after this service. Accepting someone giving you a car is easy. Accepting someone who's going to give you a house is easy. It's accepting someone who's going to give you, something in terms of promotion in your job is easy. But what about rejecting something? Because in times of acceptance, there's always going to be times of rejection. There are things that sometimes we have to reject. I remember that when I was 38 years of age, my father had a serious word with me because I wanted to go full-time in ministry. And I remember being in the job that I was, and I was in a good job. It was a great job. Finance was very good. A car, house, everything you could imagine. And I remember my dad sitting down and talking to me. He said, because he didn't understand the Lord like I understood and the calling like I understood, he said, why on earth are you leaving such a great job to go into the ministry? He could not understand that. Obviously, he couldn't understand it like I could understand it. He believed in his God. It was a Zoroastrian God. It was a God that worshipped fire. I don't know why people worship fire, but that's what he did. And that's their religion. That's not what he did, but that was their religion. And he could not understand why I was rejecting such a good job to go into the ministry, which is more or less not such a phenomenal job in the eyes of a lot of people. I had electricians over yesterday who were doing things in my house in terms of my electric. And I really got one of the guys played the guitar, so he was very interested in the guitars that I had hanging on the wall. And so we were talking about guitars and everything like that. And he turned around and he said to me, why did you give up your job? And he said, if you ever need a job, come to me, because he said, you're very technical minded. He said, we need people like this. And he was criticizing everybody under the age of 25 because he said he had lots and lots of apprentices. And he says, they just don't want to work these days. They just don't want to do the jobs that they're supposed to be doing. He says he's finding it very, very hard. He says, but if you ever want a job, you come to me. And you took me, I said, I've got a job, thank you. But he said, you only work on Sundays. If only you knew. So let's go to Hebrews 11, verse 24. Let's look at this. Only work on Sundays. It says this, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, this is amazing. I'll tell you why. This is an incredible rejection that he puts in place. I want you to understand this to the fullness. You know the story of Moses. He had providence of God. Do you know what it means to have the providence of God on your life? Let me explain a little bit about this. Providence of God on your life means that people cannot touch you even if they try. Yeah. All right? So if you read them, you just have to understand what Moses went through. He was a Hebrew baby. He was put into a basket. He was put it through the... Now, I don't know what part of the Nile, because the Nile is huge. 4,000 miles long. It's just absolutely huge. I don't know where on the Nile he was put, but he was just put in a basket on the Nile because Pharaoh decided to kill all the babies. And so, but there was providence on his life. Listen to me very carefully. There is providence on your life that people can never touch you. If you understand that what God, his hand has got on your life, you can understand then the reason of your destination and the destiny that God wants to put you into. No matter what happens around you. He was put into the river. He floated down the river, just happened to be floating down the river. And who was bathing in the river? The daughter of Pharaoh. Of all people. It wasn't just an ordinary person. It wasn't the person down the road. It was Pharaoh's daughter bathing just when the basket was in the bushes. Is that not providence or what? Was that a coincidence or was it a God incident? Well, let me tell you, it was a God incident. In Exodus chapter 2, and obviously we can't go through the whole thing, but in Exodus chapter 2, verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maiden. Walking along the Nile, she saw the basket amongst the reeds and sent her maid and brought her to her. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." There was no mystery about the fact that this was a Hebrew child. And yet Pharaoh's daughter took pity on that child. The Pharaoh's daughter then gave that boy to the mother and paid the mother to look after her own son. Is that providence? Or what? Come on. Is that providence? Why? Because God already had it in his heart and his mind that this person was going to be the deliverer for Israel. Yeah. You can never stop what God has put in place. No matter what you try to do to me, you will never stop me. No matter what you do. People have tried to do all sorts of things in the past to me. But they've all failed. Because I've got a destiny. And the destiny is continuing. It never stops. And it's the same with you. "Shall I go and call a nurse," she said, "for you from the Hebrew woman, and that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." She didn't say no. She could have said, no, kill this baby, kill him, get him out, or drown him, or do something with him, hide him. But she didn't say, no, go and get the mother. Nurse him. And do you know what? We don't know this for sure, but in verse 10 of Exodus chapter 2, it says the child grew, and we don't know how old the child grew up to until he became Pharaoh's son. Wow. A prince. If your destiny is to become a prince, you'll become a prince. If your destiny is to become king, you'll become king. It doesn't really matter. God cannot take... The devil, the Satan, the enemy cannot take away your destiny of who you are meant to be. That is the excitement thing. In Genesis 49:10, it says, "One who was with the ultimate prophet. He would have learnt the people were hoping for the time of their deliverance and their entrance into the promised land. So what God had to do to this guy, Moses, he had to bring him up as a prince. So he would learn all the Egyptian ways. He would learn the other languages. He would probably even know how to write hieroglyphics and all that kind of stuff. He would do that. He was going to be the son of the highest level of authority in Egypt. Now let me explain this. I learned this. You know, in the Bible we learn about Pharaoh being a king. Well, kings were lower than pharaohs, because a pharaoh would rule the north and the south of Egypt, the whole of Egypt, where a king would only rule in the north or the south. They also believe, and this is again up for discussion, they believe he was Ramesses number 2. Do you know Ramesses number 2 is the longest lasting pharaoh in the world? Ramesses II, if you went into the Valley of the Kings and you saw the enormity, the size of the valley itself and all the kings that have been buried there and the tombs and the artifacts, you will be just blown away. This is what Moses came into. The enormity of this. You take this church, you multiply it by 50 without exaggeration, you get a pyramid. These pharaohs were buried in these pyramids with all their silver and gold and jewelry and all sorts of things because they believed in the afterlife. That's what he was brought up in. So he knew about what it meant to worship other gods, but he had to make a decision. Yeah. When he reached the age of maturity, he faced a crucial decision in his life. Actually, he reached 40, and he knew the Egyptian culture, but he knew he had to make some kind of decision. And the Bible tells us this. The first decision is this. The first point, I want you to underscore this in your Bible, was he rejected the world's privilege. Isn't it funny how we kind of get sucked into the world's? What the world wants to give us all the time. I don't know why this happened in my personal life, but every time I wanted to go full-time in ministry, I got promoted. Even one year, I got to £10,000 rise, and I wanted to go into ministry. And I knew to myself that it wasn't the money that pleased me. It wasn't the cars. It wasn't the house. It was doing what God wanted me to do. And even though I did not reject it at the time, I knew one day I would have to reject the whole lot. You see, Moses, the first thing he did, he rejected the world's privilege. You can write that down. I don't know how it could be any more prestige than what I've described right now. He was the grandson of Pharaoh, the great ruler of the planet at that time, the most sophisticated culture, the most sophisticated society, high and advanced in every single thing you could imagine. He understood the honor of being the prince of Egypt. And yet, it says this in Hebrews, that he rejected himself as Pharaoh's son. Should he hold on to the world's prestige? In Acts 7, Stephen actually brings this up. Stephen is preaching a wonderful sermon, and he preached and he gives the history of Israel, incorporating the story of Moses. And in verse 22, he says, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and nurtured him as his own, and Moses was educated in all the learnings of the Egyptians. So he knew, he already had the time, and he began to realize there was something not quite right, that he was to be the deliverer of a great nation. And they weren't going to be the Egyptians, they were going to be the Israelites. Can you imagine being brought up through your own culture, knowing that your own culture is wrong in itself? Can you imagine your adopted parents, and you're going to come against your adopted parents, you're going to come against your adopted father or your adopted brother, you're going to come against those kind of things. Sometimes we will come against family. And sometimes the family, we have to make decisions. And I know that personally, what it means to come away from those kind of things that your family will draw you into or try to shape you into. Power, prestige, money, fame, all that kind of stuff. We think it's the end result of everything we have. Let me tell you, it's not. It'll never make you happy. It'll never fill up a gap. And we think it's going to sometimes. So the first thing he had to reject, and the first thing he did reject, was the world's prestige. The second thing is this. Look, we're going to go into the next verse, verse 25. Choosing rather to endure ill treatment, it says, with the people of God, than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Pleasures of sin for the season. Sin is a fun thing. Sin is very attractive. You would never push anybody in front of you wouldn't step out in front of a moving bus, but you'll be tempted to push somebody in front of a moving bus. Because sin is always attractive, you see. But it's momentarily. It's just there for an ounce of your life. And yet, he was able to reject all that. Can you imagine? He would have many women around him. I'm sure he was a very handsome man. He would have loads of women around him. He would have been able to have sex every day and enjoy the life of the flesh. But he chose not to. He chose to reject the pleasure of sin with a momentary and passing to do the work of God because it produces divine, everlasting life. Amen. When I read this, I also think of King David, who for a moment in his weakness saw Bathsheba. Do you remember the story? And Bathsheba was a married woman. And he saw her. And he decided to send her husband into the front line so he'll get killed so he could have Bathsheba. And you know, you think that never stops, but the guilt and everything lasts. When you commit something like that, it stays with you. Now, God will forgive you your sins, but at the end of the day, something stays. And this is what David said. He wasn't even allowed to build the temple. And he says, my sin is ever before me. He knew what it meant. And so Moses had to reject all that. Couldn't be involved in any of that anymore. That was nothing to do with him anymore. The third thing is this. It goes into verse 26. Look at this. The world's prestige, the world's pleasure, but now I've called this the world's plenty. Verse 26. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of the Egypt, he was looking towards the reward. Now this is amazing. Of all those things that he had from Egypt, the gold, the silver, the pleasures of the world, everything he had, he says, I'm rejecting all that for what? For a reward that God is going to give me. A much better reward. A reward of destiny that God is going to give me. It's going to be greater than the reward that you could ever offer me. There's nothing you can give me. The prestige to the max, the pleasures to the max, the treasures to the max ain't going to do anything for me. It's not going to chink my chain. My education ain't going to chink my chain. Nothing chinks my chain except Jesus and Jesus alone himself. Amen. The implication, there is a final reward. That's the implication of this verse. A divine reward, an eternal reward. And then it says this, and now what does he mean by the reproach of Christ? Well, there's a wonderful thought here. It would be the reproach that was similar to Christ endured. In other words, this is it. Get this, folks. He says, although Christ wasn't around during this time, and it says this in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, he says, I'm going to get the reproach exactly what Christ got. In other words, he says, people are going to come against me in the same way as they came against Christ. Would you rather have the treasures of Egypt, or would you rather have that? Things that you reject for your faith. Yeah. Not things that you step out and think you've got. But these are the things he had to reject. He said, I'm going to be reproached. The Israelites ain't going to love me. The Egyptians ain't going to love me. The only person ever going to love me is probably God himself. And that's going to be hard work as well. Because I'm right in between. I'm between a rock and a hard place. I'm falling between two stools. He was rich. Jesus became poor. Wonderful thought. He bore here a reproach, the kind of reproach, the characteristic of Christ, who was infinitely rich, infinitely privileged. Christ came from heaven. His Father sent him. He was infinitely, had everything he could possibly have, Christ had, and he compares that. He says, I'm going to go through the same reproach. Because Jesus died on the cross, he gave up his whole entire life. He was whipped. His nails put in his arms, his legs. The sins of the world was put upon him. Why? Because of you and for me. And so I don't care about what people may say to me. People have said to me, the things I've done for you, Pastor. Whoa, the things I've done for God. And I say to them, not as half as what God has done for you. You've done nothing for God compared to what Christ has done for you. Nothing. So what you're going through right now is nothing going to be compared to what you will be going through when you start to reject some things that you have to reject in your life. The fourth thing, and we're almost coming to an end. I always say this half an hour before. No, I'm only joking. He says this. It's the last one is the world's pressures. Look at verse 27. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing with the wrath of the king, for he endured to seeing him who is unseen. Now, if you ask how could he be willing to give up all the things that he saw. Now, this is the thing about it. This is what real faith is about. There are things that will tempt you. There will things that will seduce you. There will things that will say, go to this, come to this, come to this, come to this, do that, do that. And he says, no, I don't want to. Those are the things I can see. But I want to just get into my secret place and I want to see the things that I cannot see. I want God to show me things that I cannot see. How could he then? There are many times that I've moved from place to place. There are two things that really I had to step out in faith in. And one was leaving my job and the other one was leaving London to come here. But I did not see anything that was prosperous at all. But God said, you don't have to see it. I see it. If I see it, don't worry, I'll look after the rest. In fact, when I came here, I said, Lord, if I'm coming here, I left my kids, we left our children. Who would leave their children? But you have to look after your children. Not if God says go. Now, I don't just have 2 children living here, but I have 2 grandchildren living here now. You see, it's what you reject. It's not what you gain. It's what you are able to reject. It's what you're able to give up. But there are world pressures. Of course there are. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? At this age, now, this very year, I would have been retired with a salary more than my pastor's salary today. But I don't want to retire. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that would have been great. When it passed, you could have done anything you wanted. No, I didn't. I don't want to do everything I want. I want to do what Christ wants me to do. You see, in verse 27, it says, by faith he left Egypt. It's a stronger word that it refers to simple departure. It's a heart renunciation. In other words, there's a heart renunciation. I'm willing to give it up. These are world pressures around me. My mum, my dad, my sister, my friends, they're all coming against me. Pastors, they're all coming against me. Everything, but I know what God wants for me. Amen. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. He rejected Egypt as having any power over his life. He rejected the power Pharaoh supposedly had over his life, and he rejected the fear of man. To borrow the words of Proverbs 29:25, listen to this. And you know, not everybody has been so strong. Certainly Abraham hadn't right. He wound up calling his wife and his sister because he feared the king. That means Abraham disguised his wife as his sister because he feared the king that's in front of him. Let me ask you, what do you fear? Don't ever come to me and say, this is what I've done. Tell me what you've given up. And then I'll understand what you've done. It makes more sense. This is what I'm willing to do. This is where I'm willing to go. He got no weapon. Egypt's court is ready to arrest him. He's facing proud, haughty, pagan monarchs who reigns over the greatest empire in the world, and everybody knows that. And he's going to go back, being in the desert for 40 years, he's going to go back and face a Pharaoh that he could easily be killed. Nose to nose with the enemy. Nose to nose. I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to get off the floor and I'm going to get back on the horse and I'm going to start to get riding again. I'm not going to accept it. You see, he killed somebody. He killed an Egyptian, and he fled to the desert. For 40 years, that's where he thought he was going to die, in the desert. He did die in the desert, but not then, not at that time. When he was 80 years of age, God called him. It's never too late. Hello? It's never too late. 80 years of age, get back out there. Get back into Egypt and deliver my people. Never too late. You're never too old to reach people for the gospel. Are you hearing me? Yep. You're never too old. And then he made the right decisions because he rejected those other decisions by faith. There are decisions that some of us have to make in this house today. Now, some of those decisions are not always going to be for you. They're going to be for the generation after you. There are seeds that I have to plant in this church in the next 15 years that I'm never going to see grow. Well, I may see shoots. But that really doesn't matter. It's for the next generation who's going to come along. There are things that are unseen. You don't plant for your own self or for your own prosperity or for your own gain. It's not about your own gain or your own prosperity. This is not about us. This is about Him. And so I have to reject a few things to make that happen in my own life. And there's things that you have to reject in your own life so that the next generation that comes along, even if it may be your children or your friends or come along, you may have to make those sacrifices. And is it easy? Of course it's not easy. They may look good in front of you. You may have a restful life. You may go home, watch your television every day. You may be habitual in the things that you do. And those things are, they're okay, but they're boring stuff. You go home, you do exactly the same thing. You go to work, you do exactly the same thing. But God isn't looking for exactly the same things. Sometimes you have to step out and say, I'm going to do that. When I first went to India, I went to India 25 years ago. 25 years ago. I went to this, I didn't know where I was going. So I thought, I've got to go to India. I'm Indian, so I've got to go to India. Well, I'm partly Indian, so I've got to go to India, So I thought to myself, let's go to India. Let's do something in India. So a friend of mine says, I know someone in India. So he knew a German pastor in India. So I went over to India. And I was preaching in this dirty, horrible tent. It was disgusting, and I've got to be honest with you, it was really, really disgusting. And then they put me in a hotel, and that was disgusting. £3 a night, cheap. £3 a night. You Yorkshire people love it. £3 a night. But it was an incomplete hotel. You walk down the corridor, you open the door, and there was scaffolding. All right, you would drop, you would hurt yourself. I slept in the room, and a monkey entered into the window. So it was a share. You know what I mean? So I wasn't going to share my room with the monkey. In fact, I ran out, scared to death. And I remember going there and preaching, and unfortunately, I went without any prayer cover. I went without any church cover. I went without any person who knew that I was going. I thought, I'm just going to go. I'm covered. I'm an evangelist. I can do all sorts of things. I'm so great. I'm wonderful. I got the shock of my life. The food was in a big bowl, and there were more flies in there than meat. And then occasionally a cow would come along and eat from it as well. That's the kind of food we had then. I thought to myself, wow, this is. Anyway, I thought to myself, I've got to eat from this because the people are eating from this, so I've got to be respectful. So I ate from it, and I was ill for 2 years afterwards. But you see, the point being is this: I had no cover. I had no one looking out for me, no one seeing that that I'm going to be protected. Not like Madeline and James, who came with me, and they had the time of their life. Good food, everything was great, wasn't it? Nod your heads. Right, everything was great. Wasn't it great, Steve? Everything was great. Yes, he's nodding his head. Zoe, wasn't it great? It was great. You see, Mike, wasn't it great? Julie, great. Right, good. Okay. I'll pay you later. Pastor Anthony was just in hospital. That was his accommodation. We put him in there first. No. So I went there without any cover whatsoever. People who come with me now, they get cover. I protect them completely. It's a completely different thing. But sometimes you have to step out. Sometimes you have to step into things. I mean, Steve would admit with me, when we got there, he wanted to go back straight away. 10 days we were meant to be there. The first night, he wanted to go back. And I said to Anthony, put him in my room with me for the night. I'll sort him out. And we spoke all night, basically. I mean, we spoke a lot. We spoke quite a few hours, and we spoke all night. And by the morning, he was refreshed, ready to go, ready to preach, and he did brilliant stuff. Yeah. Because for him, it was fear that dictated his life. And it's got to be by faith. It's got to be what he rejected, and what he did. He didn't reject his wife or his family. What he did, he left them and said, I'm going to step out in faith. And he did it because he got off the plane. Because he ain't going to go back on the plane, I tell you that. He wasn't going to go back on the plane, whether he liked it or not. He was going to suffer all those 10 days. He was going to be there. Because he was able to do that. You see, he had the time of his life. Preaching, teaching, pastoring. He did all that with Mike. Never seen him like it before. And he came back and he became the youth leader. You see, that's what God does to you. He shapes you. You think you're okay? You think you're all right? When you got cover, when you got friends, when you got family, when you got at home, right, you feel so secure. Now, I didn't have that. I came back. When I came back, Giovanna couldn't believe me. My white trousers were black. My hair was out here. She called me Wurzel Gummidge. You know, she couldn't believe me. In fact, Tom Jones was on the plane with me. Believe it or not. I don't know if that helped at all, but he was there on the plane with me. And just, she couldn't believe the way I looked. I lost almost 4 stone in 2 years because I didn't listen to people around me. You see? I stepped out. But the problem is I came back and I thought to myself, am I ever going to go back to India? And I said, I'm never going to go back to India. But God had other plans for me. And I've been back ever since for the last 10 years. And let me tell you, folks, there are things you have to reject to move forward. There are things you have to let go to move forward. Yeah. And if you don't let go of those things, you'll never move in faith. Never move in faith. Shall we just stand? I would say spending a lot of time with the Lord, that majority of the time, I'm not talking about just simple decisions, but the big decisions we've made in life have been the right ones, me and Giovanna. Because I spend time with the Lord. Not because I don't spend time. If I don't spend time with the Lord, I will only make a decision out of fear. But majority of the times I've made decisions out of faith. I believe that God will provide. I believed that God would provide for my kids when I left them in London. I believed that he would provide for my mortgage. I believed that he would provide for my food. I believed it. Yeah. But in the same time, I had to reject a lot of things. There's decisions that people have to make in this church now to move forward. And you're never going to move forward because the comforts of home almost oppress you. You think it's great, but it's not. And sometimes you have to release some things. You have to let go of some things, you know. You get addicted to certain things, and there can be anything. It can be television. There can be so many things. And you have to say to yourself, well, I got to reject some of these things so I can move on. Do you know every single person here is called to be a deliverer? I'll say that again. Every person here is called to be a deliverer. You have people around you that need deliverance. And even every single one of us standing here, including myself, need deliverance in some way or the other. Don't kid ourselves. We're okay. We've made it. Pastor Jim's made it. No, I have not made it. I need deliverance in some areas. You need deliverance in some areas. And there are people around you, they need deliverance. And you are the answer to their prayers. Now, I don't know if you believe that, but you are. You are the Moses of the UK. Yeah. And you can take them out of bondage, and you can take them into the desert place for a while. Yeah, we were in the desert for a long time sometimes, but you will enter into the promised land. There are decisions you have to make. There are decisions that you accept, and there are decisions that you have to reject. And I want to give you an opportunity this morning because I want to pray over you. I want to talk to you and I want to pray over you that the Lord will help you make the right decisions. My faith is strong enough for everybody in this room. That isn't a boast to me. I just have that thing. I just believe in it, and I just know God can do something here this morning. I really just know it, you know. I don't believe in death. Death is something we have to go through, but I just don't believe that death should be premature. I believe that life should continue as much as we can live on this earth. I'm going to be no use in heaven, absolutely useless in heaven, because I can't evangelize in heaven. You can worship in heaven, but can't do much in heaven. In heaven that you can do on earth. There's so much you can do on this earth. So decisions you have to make. Now, if you want to move forward, I believe that God wants to speak to you this morning in making the right decisions. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be proud about it. And if you feel you're that person this morning, but you know you have to reject something, you have to give some things up, I want you to put your hands up right now. And I really want to pray for you this morning. Things that I have to reject so that I can accept where I have to go. I want you guys to come up to the front. I want to pray for you personally this morning. Would you just come up to the front? Don't be shy. And we're okay here. We're a family.